black waitress stops CEO's hand from the signature. Her whisper makes him drop the pen. The private dining room at Meridian on the 31st floor had seen a lot of deals closed over the years. Mergers, acquisitions, handshakes worth 9 figures that the rest of the world wouldn't hear about until a press release landed 3 months later. It was that kind of room. Dark wood, white linen, the kind of quiet that money buys when it wants to conduct its business without interruption. Tonight, Thomas Holt, CEO of Holt Ventures, 52 years old, the kind of man whose signature alone could move markets, sat at the center of it all with a fountain pen in his hand and a contract on the table in front of him. 48 hours of negotiation, 12 lawyers, a partnership worth $300 million, all of it coming down to this moment. This signature, this pen touching paper. His 2 business partners sat across from him, leaning forward slightly, the barely contained energy of men watching the finish line approach. "Whenever you're ready, Thomas," one of them said. Thomas uncapped the pen, lowered it toward the page. That was when Serena appeared at his right shoulder, quietly the way good waitstaff always appear, without announcement, without disruption, to refill his water glass. She leaned forward. The water poured, and then, so quietly that the 2 men across the table heard nothing, so close that her words were barely more than breath, she whispered 4 words into Thomas Holt's ear. His hand stopped. The pen hovered above the page. Then, slowly, with the careful deliberateness of a man who had just been handed something he needed time to process, he set it down. The 2 men across the table looked at each other, then at Serena, then at Thomas. "Is everything all right?" one of them asked. Thomas looked at the contract, then up at Serena, this woman he had never once looked at directly in the 3 hours they had been in this room together. "Give me a moment," he said quietly. What nobody at that table knew, not the partners, not the lawyers on standby, not even Thomas himself until 30 seconds ago, was that the woman refilling his water glass had just saved him from the single most expensive mistake of his career. And she was about to lose her job for it. 4 words. That's all she said. And this billionaire put his pen down in front of the 2 men he was about to make $300 million richer. Stay right there, because what happens next in this room is going to cost someone everything. Subscribe now if you're new here. This story is only getting started. To understand what happened in that private dining room on the 31st floor of Meridian, you need to understand 3 things. Who Thomas Holt was, who Serena James was, and why the distance between those 2 lives, measured not in floors or net worth or any of the visible metrics the world uses to separate people, was, in the ways that actually mattered, considerably smaller than anyone in that room had assumed. Holt Ventures had been built over 23 years from a single real estate investment that Thomas had made at 29 with borrowed money and a certainty that everyone around him at the time had mistaken for recklessness. It had not been recklessness. It had been the particular disciplined confidence of a man who had learned, through years of watching his father run a small construction company in Queens, with absolute integrity and very little margin for error, that the difference between a good deal and a catastrophic one was almost always in the details that people were too impatient or too arrogant to read carefully. Thomas had built Holt Ventures on that principle. He read everything, every clause, every amendment, every footnote, in every agreement that crossed his desk, no matter how many lawyers had already reviewed it, because he had seen enough deals go wrong in precisely the places that everyone assumed were already covered, to know that assumption was the most expensive word in business. He was not, by anyone's measure, a careless man. Which was why what had nearly happened at that table tonight, what would have happened, had a waitress not leaned across a water glass and changed the direction of the evening in 4 words, would have been so completely, so devastatingly out of character that the people who knew him best would not have believed it. Except that it had nearly happened, and the reason it had nearly happened was sitting across the table from him right now, in the form of 2 men Thomas had trusted for considerably longer than tonight's events suggested he should have. Derek Walsh and Paul Greer had been Thomas's business partners for 6 years. Derek was 48, lean, precise, the kind of man who wore his intelligence on the surface where everyone could see it, and occasionally mistook visibility for depth. He had come to Holt Ventures from a private equity firm in Boston, where he had made a reputation for closing deals quickly and efficiently, and he had brought that reputation with him like a piece of luggage he never quite unpacked. Paul was 51, broader, more outwardly affable, the kind of partner who remembered birthdays and poured drinks and made rooms feel comfortable in a way that was genuinely warm and occasionally deliberately deployed. He had been in commercial real estate for 25 years and had the particular confidence of a man who had never once had a deal collapse in a way he hadn't been able to manage. Together, they had brought Thomas the Vertex proposal 8 weeks ago, a development partnership, $300 million, mixed-use commercial and residential, a site in downtown Brooklyn that every developer in the city had been watching for 2 years. The numbers were compelling. The projections were careful. The opportunity was, on every surface that Thomas's team had examined, exactly what it appeared to be. What Thomas had not known, what nobody on his team had caught, including the 12 lawyers who had reviewed the document over 48 hours of negotiation, was what was buried in Section 19, subsection C, paragraph 4 of the final agreement. A clause so deeply embedded in the legal architecture of the document, so carefully constructed to look like standard contractual language, that it had passed through every review without a single flag. A clause that would have, the moment Thomas's signature dried on that page, transferred the intellectual property rights of every proprietary development process Holt Ventures had built over 23 years, quietly, legally, irrevocably, to a shell company registered in Delaware that neither Thomas nor anyone on his team had ever heard of. A company that, had anyone looked carefully enough, led back, through 3 layers of corporate structure, directly to Derek Walsh. Serena James was 34 years old and had been waitressing at Meridian for 4 years. She had grown up in the Bronx, the second of 3 daughters, raised by a mother who worked as a paralegal for 22 years and brought case files home the way other parents brought newspapers, spreading them across the kitchen table after dinner, while the girls did their homework around the edges. Serena had absorbed the language of legal documents the way children absorb whatever is consistently present in their environment, not formally, not from study, but from proximity. From years of watching her mother move through the dense, specific language of contracts and agreements and court filings with the practiced ease of someone for whom it had become a second tongue. She had not become a lawyer. Life had taken a different shape. A culinary program she had enrolled in at 22 and loved, a series of restaurant jobs that had led, eventually, to Meridian, where the work was demanding and the clientele was the kind that kept the dining room full of exactly the sort of conversations Serena had grown up at the edge of without ever quite being invited into. She had a habit. It was not a calculated habit, not something she had decided to do or designed for any purpose. It was simply the result of 20 years of watching her mother, the way a paralegal's daughter reads the room, the way a person raised around legal language notices it the way others notice music. When documents were open near the tables she served, her eyes moved to them. Not intrusively, not deliberately, just the way fluent people hear their language in a crowd without meaning to. Tonight, refilling water glasses at the most important table in the room, she had glanced at the open contract in front of Thomas Holt. And she had seen, in the time it took to pour a glass of water, something that 12 lawyers had missed in 48 hours. Section 19, subsection C, paragraph 4. She had read it twice to be certain. Then she had set down the water pitcher, leaned slightly toward Thomas Holt's right ear, and said the 4 words that had caused a fountain pen to stop moving 1 inch above a $300 million signature line. Don't sign it yet.
Don't sign it yet.
What?
The private dining room had changed temperature. Not literally. The climate control at Meridian was precise to the degree, one of the many invisible details that justified the price of a room like this. But the air had shifted in the particular way that air shifts when something has happened that cannot be unhappened, and everyone present is still in the process of calculating what it means. Thomas Holt sat with his pen on the tablecloth. Derek Walsh and Paul Greer sat across from him with the careful, studied composure of men who had not yet decided how to respond to something they had not prepared for. And Serena stood at Thomas's right shoulder. Water pitcher in hand, posture straight, the professional stillness of a woman who had done what she came to do and was now waiting. With the particular patience of someone who understood that the next 60 seconds were not hers to control. Derek spoke first. He always spoke first. It was one of the things Thomas had noted about him over 6 years. The reflex to fill silence before it could be filled by anyone else. The instinct of a man who understood that narrative control began with the first sentence. "Thomas," he said, with the measured, reasonable tone of someone managing a misunderstanding. "Is there a problem?" "Give me a moment," Thomas said again. He was looking at the contract, specifically at section 19, which he was now reading for the first time tonight with the kind of attention he usually brought to every document and had somehow, in the momentum of 48 hours of negotiation and the particular pressure of a room full of people waiting for him to simply sign, allowed himself to skip past. "We've had 12 lawyers look at this," Paul said, his voice carrying the easy authority of a man accustomed to rooms resolving in his favor. "There's nothing to Thomas. What are you looking for?" "A moment, Paul," Thomas said, quietly. Finally, Paul sat back. Derek looked at Serena. It was not a friendly look. It was the look of a man identifying the source of an interruption and deciding quickly and without particular deliberation what category to file it under and how to address it. "Excuse me," Derek said, turning his attention fully to Serena, with the smooth, surface-level politeness that people like him deployed when they meant something considerably less polite underneath it. Did you say something to him?"
I mentioned something I noticed.
"Something to him?" Serena met his eyes. "I'm sorry? Just now," Derek said, "you leaned over and said something to Mr. Holt while he was about to sign." "I was refilling his water glass," Serena said, "and a beat. And I mentioned something I noticed," she said. "That's all." Derek looked at her for a long moment, the look of a man taking the measure of something he has decided is beneath his concern, but has nonetheless become, inconveniently, his concern. "You noticed something," he repeated. The repetition was not curiosity. It was the particular condescension of a man demonstrating through tone alone how unlikely he found the sentence he was repeating. "In the contract," Serena said evenly. The room went very still. Paul Greer leaned forward. His affability, the warmth that filled rooms and made deals feel comfortable, had evaporated completely. What sat underneath it, now that it was gone, was something considerably colder and more precise. "Young lady," he said, with the deliberate patience of a man speaking to someone he believed had made a significant error in judgment. "This is a private business meeting, a $300 million agreement between parties who have been negotiating for the better part of 2 months. Our legal team—" "I understand that," Serena said, "has reviewed every page of this document multiple times, by people with law degrees from institutions that I imagine." "Paul?" Thomas's voice. Flat, not loud. Paul stopped. Thomas was still looking at section 19. He had found paragraph 4. He was reading it now, not quickly, not the way he had allowed himself to move through this document earlier tonight, but slowly, the way his father had taught him to read anything that had a signature line at the bottom, word by word, clause by clause. The pen was very still on the tablecloth beside his hand. Serena stood quietly. She was aware, with the particular clarity of someone who has done something irreversible and is now simply waiting for the consequences to arrive, that this moment was going to cost her something. She had known that before she leaned toward Thomas Holt's ear. Had made the calculation in the 3 seconds between reading paragraph 4 and setting down the water pitcher. Not the full calculation, not with all the numbers, but enough of it to understand the shape of what she was choosing. She was a waitress at Meridian. The men across the table were the kind of clients that restaurants like Meridian existed to serve. The the kind whose displeasure traveled upward through management with the speed and force of something that had been given momentum by money. She had chosen anyway. Because some things once seen cannot be unseen, and some clauses once read cannot be allowed to go unmarked, simply because marking them is inconvenient. Her mother had taught her that. Not in those words. In the way a paralegal teaches things, through example, through the steady demonstration of what it looks like to take a document seriously, even when the people around you would prefer that you didn't. Derek stood up. Not aggressively. Derek Walsh did not do anything aggressively, at least not where it could be observed. He stood with the controlled deliberateness of a man who had decided to resolve a situation through channels that were technically available to him. He walked to the door of the private dining room, opened it, spoke to someone outside. Within 90 seconds, Aaron Briggs, the floor manager of Meridian, 40 years old, a careful man whose entire professional existence depended on the satisfaction of clients at tables like this one, appeared in the doorway. Derek spoke to him quietly. Aaron listened. Then he looked at Serena with an expression that contained, in equal measure, apology and the particular helplessness of a man who understood exactly what was being asked of him and did not have the institutional leverage to refuse it. "Serena?" he said. "Can I speak with you outside for a moment?" Serena looked at Thomas. Thomas was still reading. He had not looked up. She set the water pitcher down on the service station beside the door, followed Aaron out. The conversation in the hallway took 4 minutes. Aaron did most of the talking. Serena did most of the listening, standing with her hands at her sides and her spine straight, the way her mother stood when she was receiving information she had already, in some sense, anticipated. "The clients have requested," Aaron started. "I understand," Serena said. "It's not my decision." "I know, Aaron." "Serena, if it were up to me." "It's okay," she said, and meant it, not in the sense that it didn't hurt, but in the sense that she had made her choice with full knowledge of its cost. And she was not going to make Aaron carry that. She untied her apron, folded it, handed it to him, and walked toward the elevator with her head up and her hands steady, and the 4 words she had whispered into Thomas Holt's ear still hanging somewhere in the air behind her. "Don't sign it yet." Inside the private dining room, Thomas Holt had reached the end of paragraph 4. He read it once more. Then he set the contract flat on the table, placed both hands on either side of it, and looked across at Derek Walsh, who had returned to his seat and was now watching Thomas with the careful, neutral expression of a man waiting to find out which direction the next 60 seconds were going to move. Thomas looked at him for a long time. "Derek," he said finally, "tell me about the Delaware company." The color moved in Derek Walsh's face, slowly, completely. In the particular way that color moves when a man realizes, in one instant, that the question being asked could only have come from someone who had read something he had spent 8 weeks making sure nobody would read. Paul Greer went very still beside him. And the $300 million room, the dark wood, the white linen, the quiet that money buys, went absolutely, completely silent. Thomas Holt just said 5 words, and Derek Walsh's face just told him everything he needed to know. Subscribe now, because what happens next in this room is going to change everything. For Derek, for Paul, and for the waitress who just handed in her apron in a hallway 4 minutes ago. Stay with me. The silence in the private dining room lasted exactly 7 seconds. Thomas counted them. Not deliberately. He was not a man who counted silences as a rule. But this one had a quality to it that made time feel measurable. The quality of a silence that contains within it the answer to a question that hasn't technically been answered yet. Derek Walsh's face had done the answering. In 23 years of business, Thomas had sat across from a great many people in a great many rooms and had learned through the accumulated, patient observation of a man who believed that faces told the truth, that words were specifically designed to conceal, to read what was happening beneath the surface of a composed expression. What was happening beneath Derek's composed expression right now was not composure at all. It was the specific, internal scramble of a man whose architecture has just been breached and who is running very fast and very quietly through his remaining options. The Delaware Company, Thomas said again, steadily. The way he said everything when it mattered most, without heat, without performance, with the particular calm of a man who has already decided that this conversation is going to be completed fully, regardless of how uncomfortable it becomes. Derek looked at Paul. It was a fraction of a second, barely a glance, the kind of sideways communication that people who have worked together for years develop into something almost subliminal. But Thomas caught it. He had been catching the glances between Derek and Paul for 3 hours without knowing what they meant. He knew now. It's a holding structure, Derek said. Standard practice for liability. Whose liability? Thomas asked. The partnership's. It's a protective. Derek. The single word, said the way Thomas said it, stopped everything. The company is registered to a beneficial owner, Thomas said. Section 19, subsection C, paragraph 4. The IP transfer clause routes to that owner upon signature. I'd like to know who that owner is. Derek was quiet. Paul had not moved. The candles on the table between them cast their light upward in the particular way that candlelight does in rooms like this. Warm, flattering, designed to make everything look better than it is. Thomas noticed for the first time how much work this room had been doing for the last 3 hours. How carefully this environment had been selected. How much of what he had been experiencing as atmosphere had been, in fact, intention. It's a structure we've used before, Derek said, one final time, with the diminished conviction of a man playing a card he knows has already been read. Not with my company, Thomas said. Not with my IP, and not with my signature. He picked up the contract, closed it, set it on the far edge of the table, away from him, away from the pen, with the deliberate finality of something being set aside and not returned to. I'd like you both to leave, he said. Paul Greer found his voice first. Thomas, let's not do anything. I'm not doing anything, Thomas said. I'm asking you to leave. Calmly. Tonight. The rest of it will happen through lawyers in the morning, the way these things should happen. You're making a mistake, Paul said, and the affability was completely gone now, replaced by something that had always been underneath it and was now no longer needing to be concealed, simply present. This deal is the best opportunity Holt Ventures has seen in 5 years. If you walk away from it over a fraud clause, Thomas said. The word landed in the room with the weight that precise, accurate words always carry when deployed in the right moment. Fraud, not alleged, not potential, not a misunderstanding or a structural anomaly or a liability protection mechanism. A fraud clause, written deliberately, buried carefully, designed to transfer 23 years of proprietary development work, the accumulated intellectual capital of everything Thomas had built, to a company that existed specifically to receive it, without Thomas ever knowing it was gone until it was too late to recover. Paul said nothing. Derek said nothing. Thomas stood. Good night, gentlemen, he said. They left without another word. The door of the private dining room closed behind them, and Thomas stood alone at the table for a long moment, the contract on the far edge, the pen on the tablecloth, the candles doing their warm, indifferent work, and felt the particular settling weight of a moment that had been very close to going entirely differently. $300 million, 23 years. 4 words. He picked up the pen, looked at it, set it back down. Then he walked to the door and opened it and stepped into the hallway and looked for the waitress who had been asked to leave 4 minutes before everything changed. She was gone. Aaron Briggs was at the host station when Thomas appeared. He looked up with the expression of a man who had been dreading this conversation and was not entirely surprised it had arrived. The young woman, Thomas said. Who served our table tonight? Serena, Aaron said. Where is she? She, Mr. Holt, I have to apologize. The clients requested. I know what they requested, Thomas said. Where is she? Aaron looked at him for a moment. She just left, he said. 5 minutes ago, she would have taken the elevator down to the lobby. Thomas looked at the elevator bank, then back at Aaron. I need her information, he said. Her contact details, whatever you have. Aaron hesitated. The professional reflex of a manager navigating the intersection of employee privacy and client authority. A calculation that took approximately 2 seconds and resolved in the only direction it could resolve when the client was Thomas Holt. Of course, he said. 1 moment. Serena was in the lobby when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number. She almost didn't answer. It was late. She was tired, the particular tiredness of someone who has spent an evening in a sustained state of quiet tension and is now, finally, on the other side of it. She had her coat on and her bag over her shoulder, and the lobby of the building was emptying around her into the New York night. She answered on the third ring. "Is this Serena James?" "It is," she said. "My name is Thomas Holt," the voice said. "I believe you just left my table." Serena stopped walking. "Mr. Holt," she said carefully. "I owe you an apology," he said. "And a conversation. Are you still in the building?" "I'm in the lobby," she said. "Don't leave," Thomas said. "Please. I'll be down in 3 minutes." He was down in 2. He came through the lobby with the purposeful stride of a man who had somewhere to be and had decided, clearly and recently, that this was it. He was still in his dinner jacket, still carrying the composure that he brought to every room, but underneath it something had shifted. The particular quality of a man who has just looked directly at something he nearly lost and is still, quietly, recalibrating. He stopped in front of Serena. She was a full foot shorter than him. Gray uniform, bag over one shoulder. The lobby of a 31-floor building in Midtown Manhattan at 9:45 at night, the city moving its ordinary business through the glass doors behind her. He looked at her. Really looked, the way he had not looked in 3 hours of service at close range, and said, "How did you see it?" Serena looked back at him steadily. "My mother was a paralegal for 22 years, she said. "She brought case files home. I grew up reading contracts at the kitchen table." Thomas absorbed this. "Section 19, he said. Subsection C, paragraph 4. "Paragraph 4, she confirmed. "Our legal team missed it," he said. 12 lawyers, 48 hours. "People miss things," Serena said, "especially when the thing is designed to be missed." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "You knew it would cost you your job," he said. "When you leaned over." "I thought it might," she said. "And you did it anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Serena considered the question, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wanted to give him the true one, rather than the convenient one. "Because it was wrong," she said simply. "What was in that contract? It was designed to take something from you that you'd spent your whole career building. And I happened to see it, and I just couldn't walk away and say nothing." She paused. "I don't know how to do that," she said. "Walk away from something wrong because speaking up is inconvenient. I've never known how to do that." Thomas Holt stood in the lobby of his own building and looked at the woman who had saved him from the most expensive mistake of his professional life and felt, moving through him with the slow, settling certainty of something that had been true for a while, but was only now being fully understood. Something that he recognized as the particular weight of a debt that money alone was not going to be sufficient to repay. "Come back upstairs," he said. "Please, there are things I need to say to you, and I'd rather not say them in a lobby." Serena looked at him, then at the elevator, then back at him. "Okay," she said. The private dining room looked different the second time. Same dark wood, same white linen, same candles burning down toward their last hour. But the table had been cleared of everything except 2 water glasses and the contract, still sitting on the far edge where Thomas had placed it, closed, facing away from both of them like something that had been dealt with and set aside. Which it had. Serena sat across from Thomas Holt for the first time all evening, not beside him, not behind him, not at the careful, practiced distance of service, but directly across. Equal distance from the center of the table. The geometry of a conversation rather than a transaction. She folded her hands on the white linen. Thomas looked at the contract on the far edge of the table, then at her. "I want to understand something," he said, "before anything else." "Okay," Serena said. "You've been serving this room for 4 years," he said. "In that time, how many documents have you seen?" "At tables like this one." Serena thought about it. "Dozens," she said. "Maybe more. People bring contracts to dinner more than you'd think. Especially in rooms like this one, where they feel private. And you read them," Thomas said, "when you can." "Not deliberately," she said. "It's just the way my eyes move. The way I was raised. My mother used to say that a document is a person's intentions written down in language they think nobody else will understand. She thought everyone should be able to read them. She sounds remarkable, Thomas said. She is, Serena said simply. Thomas leaned forward slightly. In the 4 years you've been in this room, he said, has anything like tonight ever happened before? Have you ever seen something in a document that concerned you? Serena was quiet for a moment. Once, she said, about 2 years ago. A lease agreement. The tenant's renewal clause had been altered from what the tenant was describing to his colleague at the table. The numbers didn't match what he thought he was signing. What did you do? Nothing, she said. Thomas looked at her. It wasn't my place, she said. I was the waitress. They were clients. I poured their coffee, and I watched a man sign a lease that was going to cost him considerably more than he understood. And I said nothing because I told myself it wasn't my business. She looked at the tablecloth for a moment. I thought about that man for a long time afterwards, she said. I still think about him sometimes. I don't know what happened to him, whether he figured it out, whether it ruined him, or whether he absorbed it and moved on. I just know that I saw something and I said nothing, and I have never fully made my peace with that. She looked back up at Thomas. Tonight was different, she said. I wasn't going to do it again. Thomas sat with that for a moment. The candles burned. The city moved its quiet, enormous business through the windows beyond the room. Somewhere below them, 31 floors down, New York was doing what New York always does. Indifferent, relentless, magnificent. Derek Walsh, Thomas said finally, and Paul Greer. I've worked with them for 6 years. I know, Serena said. I've served this room many times. I recognized them. 6 years, Thomas said again, not with anger, with the particular quiet bewilderment of a man trying to locate the moment where his understanding of something diverged from reality. I trusted them completely. I know, Serena said again. Gently this time. How does a person do that? Thomas said. Build something for 6 years alongside someone and have it be not what you thought it was. Not even close. Serena looked at him steadily. I think, she said carefully, that people like Derek Walsh are very good at being exactly what you need them to be, for exactly as long as they need to be it. And then one day, the thing they actually want becomes more important than the performance. And that's when you find out. Thomas looked at her. You figured that out from serving tables? I figured that out from watching people, she said, which is most of what serving tables actually is, if you do it long enough. Thomas picked up the closed contract from the far edge of the table, held it for a moment, then set it back down, not on the far edge this time, but directly in front of him, between them. My legal team will handle this in the morning, he said. Derek and Paul will have lawyers by noon. It will be complicated and expensive and long. I imagine so, Serena said. I'll need a witness, he said. Someone who was present, who can attest to what happened in this room tonight. Serena looked at him. I was in the hallway, she said. By the time anything happened at the table, I was already gone. You were at the table, Thomas said, when I stopped signing. You heard Derek's response to my question. You saw the room. Mr. Holt, he said. A beat. Thomas, she said. I'm a waitress. My testimony in whatever legal proceeding follows this evening is going to be exactly what my lawyers need, Thomas said. Someone with no stake in the outcome, no financial interest, no prior relationship with any party. Someone who read the clause independently and can confirm what it says and what it means. He looked at her. Someone, he said, whose credibility is frankly considerably higher than anyone else who was in this room tonight, because you had nothing to gain and you spoke up anyway. Serena was quiet. Will you help me? Thomas said. With what comes next, not just tonight, the process that follows. Yes, she said. Of course. Thomas nodded. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his dinner jacket and produced a card. Simple, dark navy, his name and direct line. He placed it on the table in front of her. I also need to address what happened to your job tonight, he said. Serena looked at the card. That's between me and Meridian, she said. You don't need to. Derek Walsh had you removed from this room, Thomas said. From your own place of work, because you did something that inconvenienced him, and he had access to a lever that let him remove the inconvenience. That is not something I'm willing to leave unaddressed. He paused. I've been a client of this restaurant for 11 years, he said. I think that earns me a conversation with management about a staffing decision made at my table tonight. Serena looked at him for a long moment. You don't have to do that, she said. I know, Thomas said. He said it the way she had said it 2 years ago about the lease agreement she hadn't flagged. The way people say things when they have decided that knowing they don't have to is precisely the reason they're going to. He called Aaron Briggs back into the room. The conversation was brief. Thomas spoke. Aaron listened with the focused attention of a man whose major client was explaining something that he very much wanted to get right. There was a moment, somewhere in the middle of it, where Aaron's expression moved through several things quickly and arrived at something that looked like relief. When Thomas finished, Aaron looked at Serena. I owe you an apology, he said. A real one. What happened tonight was wrong, and I handled it wrong, and I'm sorry. It's okay, Aaron, Serena said. It isn't, he said. But I'm going to try to make it closer to okay. 2 days later, Derek Walsh and Paul Greer were served with legal papers. Thomas's team had worked through the night, pulling corporate records, tracing the Delaware entity, documenting the chain of ownership that led, through 3 layers of carefully constructed distance, directly to Derek. It was, by every legal assessment Thomas received in the 72 hours that followed, one of the more audacious attempted frauds his lawyers had seen in years. Not because it was crude, but because it was elegant. Because it had been designed with the full knowledge of how Thomas operated, by men who had watched him operate for 6 years and had built their scheme around the precise dimensions of his trust. It had failed because of 4 words, whispered by a woman with a water pitcher, who had grown up at a kitchen table covered in case files, and had decided, this time, not to say nothing. 3 weeks after the night at Meridian, Serena James sat in the offices of Holt Ventures, on the 28th floor of a building on Park Avenue. Not as a visitor. Not as a witness. Though that process was ongoing, handled by Thomas's legal team with the care and thoroughness that the situation required. She sat in a leather chair across from Thomas Holt's desk, in the particular quality of morning light that comes through east-facing windows in Manhattan in November. Clean, specific, the kind of light that shows everything exactly as it is. Thomas had a folder open in front of him. I want to offer you a position, he said. Contract review associate. It's a junior role. I want to be honest about that. The salary is here. He slid a paper across the desk. The responsibilities are here. Another paper. It's not where your ceiling is. It's where the door is. The ceiling is something we figure out as we go. Serena looked at the papers, then at Thomas. I don't have a law degree, she said. I know, Thomas said. I have 12 lawyers. What I apparently don't have, what 12 lawyers with law degrees from very good institutions apparently could not provide me, is someone who reads a document the way you read a document, with the kind of attention that doesn't assume everything is fine because other people have already looked. He leaned forward. I'm not hiring your degree, Serena, he said. I'm hiring the thing you did in that room. The judgment, the courage, the fact that you saw something wrong and you said something even though saying something was going to cost you. It did cost me, she said. I know, he said. And I'm sorry for that. More than I've been able to adequately express in the conversations we've had so far. He looked at her steadily. This doesn't make it even, he said. I'm not offering you this job because I think it settles a debt. I'm offering it because you're exactly the kind of person this company needs and has apparently been operating without. Serena looked at the papers again. At the salary figure that was, by any measure she had access to, considerably more than she had been making at Meridian. At the title, modest, honest, exactly what Thomas had said it was. A door, not a ceiling. She thought about her mother, about case files spread across a kitchen table, about a lease agreement 2 years ago and a man she had never been able to stop thinking about. About 4 words whispered into a CEO's ear in a private dining room while the city moved its business 31 floors below. About the version of herself that had walked away from something wrong because it wasn't her place. And the version that had decided finally, permanently that it was. Yes, she said. The legal proceedings against Derek Walsh and Paul Greer took 14 months. They were, by the end of them, considerably less wealthy and considerably less positioned than they had been on the evening they sat across a candlelit table and watched a fountain pen stop moving 1 inch above a signature line. Derek's Delaware company was dissolved. The fraud clause was entered into evidence. Serena's testimony, clear, precise, delivered with the unhurried certainty of someone who had read the document carefully and remembered exactly what it said, was cited by Thomas's legal team as material to the outcome. She sat in that hearing room the way her mother had always sat in rooms full of documents and language and consequence, straight-backed, attentive, completely unintimidated by the size of what was happening around her. Her mother, watching from the gallery, said nothing, but she reached over and squeezed Serena's hand once before the proceedings began. And Serena understood in that squeeze everything her mother had been trying to teach her at a kitchen table covered in case files for the better part of her childhood. That documents are people's intentions, written in language they think nobody else will understand. And that the most important thing a person can do, the thing that changes rooms, changes outcomes, changes lives, is simply to understand it anyway. And then say something. 4 words. Don't sign it yet. That's all it took. From a woman with a water pitcher and a mother who brought case files home to stop a $300 million fraud and change 2 lives forever. If this story moved you, if you've ever seen something wrong and had to decide whether to speak up, share this video right now. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in Serena's place. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now, because every week we tell the stories of the people who spoke up when it would have been easier not to. And the world is better every single time they do. Because that is what integrity costs. Sometimes it costs you your apron, your shift, your place in a room full of people who would prefer that you stay quiet. But here's what it never costs you. Yourself. Serena James already knew that. She learned it at a kitchen table. From a woman who believed that everyone should be able to read the language that power writes itself in, and that when you can read it, you have an obligation. Not to power, not to the room, not to the people who would prefer your silence, but to the truth, which was sitting there in paragraph 4, waiting for someone to finally see it and say something.